welcome everybody to season 4, episode 2 of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. So happy to be able to join you today. I'm really excited about I don't know if it's really a topic, but I get to introduce you all to Lindsay May, who is a new member of our Ferris team. And we are going to be talking about the quiet student today. So really excited for that. Also, it's really fun for me because usually Matt joins me on the screen, but instead he's just sitting next to me running all of our stuff. So that's kind of nice. I don't feel quite as lonely as if I was just talking to myself and you guys. A couple of things that I want to remind you. We are in September. So remember, in the rhythm of the academic year, what's going on for your students. They are thinking about kind of like the reality of college, and this is where they live now. And so if you are doing your impact cohort with us, or if you're doing focus with us, this is the time to be going to those resources so that you're telling your students. We always say, like, if you can predict how they're feeling, then they think you're a genius, and they are like, wow, I should listen to her more often. So September, which is very exciting. And then I don't know about you guys, but Matt and I both have visited a couple of campuses in the last month or so that are having COVID stuff going on. And so I think that is another kind of thing that's rising to the top. And so many of those schools are like, oh, right, how are we going to quarantine? What are we going to do? And so it's like flu season, except it's COVID season right now. So okay, before we jump into our main topic, you know that it is now time for State of the Union. I don't know if you all remember, but last week when we were talking about State of the Union, I was telling you about the Title IX rules that were going to come out in October. And Matt said, I bet they're not going to come out in October. And lo and behold, he was correct. So the reason we know this is because the Education Department hasn't sent the plans to the Office of Management and Budget, and they take about 120 days to review them. So remember, Title IX going to come out in April, then May, then October. If the Education Department sent all of the changes to OIRA this week, and it took the 120 days, then the earliest that we would see those are in December. But the regulations are going to come into effect in July. So you have a really short window to kind of field both sides of that, to field the current regulations, and then also to get your changes in place for the new regulations that are coming. So that's an important thing to remember. Also, in the Washington Post, a great article about a student who was he's actually amazing. I'm not gonna recount the whole article because it's too amazing. I want to do it justice. You should go and read it. But this student got a scholarship to a campus, but he was homeless, and so he didn't have an address. And so then the scholarship got taken away, and there's been a big uproar about that. It has an happy ending, I'll just tell you that much. But it just really calls to the front of your mind the difficulties that so many of our students have. You know, the statistics of like 8% of our students are home insecure, and just thinking about that being true in high school, and then trying to have applications with a good address where you don't have your papers and you don't have a place that they can send information to. So I would really recommend you give that a full read. It was really incredible. Another thing for you to be really aware of, actually, before we jump to orientation, is that we are seeing schools with a bunch of math deficits for students coming in. So they're feeling really, really overwhelmed with the academic underpreparedness of math. Reading scores have fallen, but math scores have plummeted. So there's an article in Inside Higher Ed that just talks about how there's teachers who are grading like what they would consider to be an easy pop quiz, and none of the answers are the same, and they're all wrong. And so this is from Temple University said, we had kind of a preparatory math class. Before the pandemic, we would put about 800 students into that class per semester. And it's the equivalent of 9th grade math. By 2021, it had swelled to 1,400 students. So they're just feeling very overwhelmed. There's a lot of discussion about how it's hard to do math in virtual classrooms, but also the problem of maybe you didn't learn algebra, but then your next class is geometry. So we're not identifying that maybe you didn't do as well in that one math class because you're moving around into different areas of math. So lots of recommendations about peer tutoring, about making sure that you're doing placement tests so that you understand where your students are. But it for sure is a thing that we're seeing on our campuses and that we're going to have to pay attention to. Good news, there's a survey coming out of Healthy Minds Network. They interviewed about 75,000 students at 135 colleges between September of 2022 and June of 2023. Depression is decreasing just a little bit, but still the fact that it's decreasing is really encouraging. I know so many of your campuses are trying to figure out what to do about how we support students that are having depression, anxiety. So depression is down by about 3 percentage points. Anxiety is down by 1 percentage point. And then suicidal ideation also down by 1. So hopefully this is the start of a trend. I bring it to your attention just because the volume of students who need support is really overwhelming on so many campuses. And so it's just a continuing process of how we can address that and how we can fix it. All right, another article I want to call your attention to is about orientation. I'm not going to go over the entire thing. I think this one also is worth a read. It's about what students think the primary function of orientation should be, their preferences in terms of live or online. This came out of a survey from about 170 colleges and universities, about 3,000 respondents. It just talks a lot about pre-orientation programs, summer bridge programs, how students are like, I appreciate all of the academic help and like knowing the resources, but also I want to have time to meet my friends. There's some great quotes in this article about students saying like, I just need to know how to get from one place to the next. Could we just walk around and you tell me what all of the buildings are? Or more activities for students who want to find connections. And of course, I would like some more information about how to use Canvas or Moodle or whatever your LMS is, because it's become so ubiquitous in our classrooms. Okay. 2 more for you. There's a great article that you can actually pass on to your students. It starts with Dear College Students, and it's called Advice for Students So They Don't Sound Silly in Emails. And it is a really well-written, easily digestible article that just is like, you need to use a clear subject line. You need to use a salutation and a signature, right? Capitalization, we're not texting, but the 2 pieces that I really love, number 1, do your part in solving what you need to solve. If you email to ask for something that you could look up, then you risk presenting yourself as less resourceful than you ought to be. So instead of saying, what's our homework for tonight? You might write, I looked through the syllabus and course website for this weekend's assigned work, but unfortunately I was unable to locate it. So I think that's awesome for students to hear. And then the other point that they make is be aware of concerns about entitlement. If you appear to demand help, shrug off absences, or assume late work will be accepted without penalty because you have a good reason, your professor's probably not going to take kindly to that. So you should take some responsibility, even if your email says something like, I didn't plan ahead well enough, I accept whatever policies you have for late work. I think that language is really helpful for students to learn. So send that to all of your students, especially thinking about your freshmen who may have never had the experience of having to email a faculty member before. Really, really useful. And then the last one I have for you is just about York College doing their mentorship oh, sorry, Matt, you're right. This is the emotional labor. This is worth a read as well. This one is about how so many of us at work do really hard emotional labor to keep everything even keeled, to listen to each other, to keep our emotions in check, to inspire people to cooperate with each other, which is all ways that we keep our business, our university running well. And yet it's very hard to measure and it's very hard to compensate for, right? So that's a great article just about all of the things that we do every day to kind of regulate our students and ourselves and with our colleagues as well. That is the State of the Union, which means that I get to move on to introducing our guests to you. So, hey, Lindsay. Oh, that's a picture of Lindsay. Lindsay, hi.
Hey.
Good to see you. Lindsay May is our new client development representative. She graduated from ACU. She has a degree in marketing and management, as well as a minor in psychology. Remind me, you've been with us for how long?
About a little over a month, so not very long.
Very, very short amount of time. Lindsay was like, hey, I want to start, after the summer. And we were like, okay, but can you just come in a little bit over the summer and spend time with us? So she's been around the office. That started officially about a month ago. Lindsay, I know so much about you. So I'm going to share with our listeners before we dive into the questions. So first of all, you are an Enneagram. You're a 7 with an 8 wing, right? Which is what I am, which is what Shauna is too. So we bring the joy. We're gonna have a lot of fun in the office together. Also, I don't know if you know this, but first let me say, Lindsay is a singer-songwriter. You can look her up on any place where you can listen to music. Do you know that 3 years ago today is the day that Override got put on Spotify, Apple Music? Did you know that 3 years ago this day?
I honestly didn't.
Isn't that exciting? Well, congratulations. You have a 3-year anniversary coming up for that. You talk a lot about your Gallup strengths. So things like positivity, being a restorer, being an includer, being a communicator, which puts you in such a great position. We want to reflect back on your work as the president of the student government at ACU, but also to think a little bit about your entry into college. We've been talking on Cap and Gown for 3 years now about the experience of a student in COVID, especially in those early years where we sent students home and they weren't connected. And you have the really unique perspective of having lived that experience. Mm-hmm. And so I want to delve into that a little bit as well. So can we just start with, tell me a little bit about yourself and your educational background?
Yeah, so you've kind of covered a lot of the bases already, but I studied marketing and management in the College of Business, and what brought me to that specific degree choice, I guess, is I just wanted to understand why certain brands can sell to certain groups of people. And then studying psychology is really just kind of, why do people make the decisions that they make, and trying to merge those studies together and just get a little bit of a different perspective on people. And so at the root of it all, I am a people person, as you mentioned, Enneagram 7. I love just forming relationships, but as we'll get in a little later, it takes me a little bit to kind of get comfortable with people just so that I can try to be as intentional as possible with the relationships that I form. And so that's just a little bit about what I studied. Yeah.
That's a great introduction to yourself. So can you talk, in your role that you've had for 1 whole month right now, can you talk about this idea of marketing and psychology? You're in a position where you're talking to schools, trying to solve problems for them around student success, looking at what they do, understanding what they need, saying, here are the tools that are going to help you most. How does your degree help you with that process?
I think it starts first with identifying what the person on the other end wants and needs and trying to find a solution for them. And if that is telling them about a certain feature or showing them that this is how you can cultivate more meaningful relationships with people, just trying to get to the root of what drives their wants and needs and things like that has really been useful. But it is kind of hard when you're just sitting behind a screen and trying to assume sometimes what it is that those administrators are looking for, because even in my time this past year, I've just seen a complete shift in just the overall institution structure of smaller universities and how are we reaching students post-COVID and getting students involved and connected has kind of changed a little bit. So
Yeah, for sure. I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things that we are really passionate about at Ferris, and that we never want to take our eyes off, is that we are really trying to solve the student problem. We want to solve the problems for the students, and the schools that we work with and the practitioners that we get to support and partner with are always thinking, how do I create the right framework, the right opportunities? How do I use the right language to connect with students to make sure that they know that they're seen and that they have the scaffolding to support them through to success? And so it's really funny. I think one of the things that resonates with our partners is that we really are invested in those students and want to say, sometimes I say, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just, like, you really need this. Like, this is really going to change the way that you do your work with students, and free you up to be able to actually see them. So I think that student-centric model is really unique to the way that we do. Okay, so remind me of the timeline. You came to ACU in fall of 2019. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so can you just walk me through the first maybe 2 years? You came and then we sent you home March of 2020, which, do you remember, like, what were you thinking when it was like, hey, everybody don't come back?
Yeah, well, I was actually on a hiking trip with my family in Oklahoma during spring break. I had hardly any service, and I was supposed to be going on a retreat with the American Marketing Association, which was a student org I was involved with, and they were like, actually, it's been canceled. Like, school's also canceled for an extra week, so just stay with your families. And I was like, oh, like 1 week at max is the length that we would be staying home. And then obviously it went for the entire semester, but it was just really weird. And I don't even know. For some people, I think they were joyous at first, like, yeah, no school. But as time went on, it began to get harder and harder.
Yeah, I think that for freshmen in that year, it must have been such a challenge, because it's like you have your first semester that's really hard. You and I talked about this the other day. I mean, when my first semester, I was like, I'm not coming back. I don't want to do this. Like, it is the hardest semester for freshmen. And then you're kind of like, all right, I'm here. You know, I'll come back. And so then you do, but you hadn't yet had an opportunity to make really strong connections yet. Is that right?
Yeah. So I felt like I finally kind of found a little bit of a community of people right before spring break, and we had to go home because freshman year is just hard for everyone. You're trying to adjust to having responsibility and being away from home and trying to make friends and get good grades. And in my case, I was working a lot off of campus. And so that kind of took up more time, so I couldn't be as involved in student events on campus. So just lots of things. You really have to play your cards right if you want like that instantaneous community. But it was a little difficult, and shifting to Zoom and trying to meet people in that way was a little bit difficult. So just all of the things that you can think of were going wrong.
Yeah, trying to create a social life over Zoom would be incredibly, especially because everybody, first of all, you know, before COVID, we used to have to teach all of our clients kind of how to use Zoom, because it wasn't like everybody was using it all the time. And so in those early days, there was a lot of getting used to, like, how do we use this platform and how do we talk to each other? And then just trying to think about how you kind of run into people across campus, which is part of how you make those social connections. And then when you're obviously so isolated, would be very difficult. Okay, so you were home for the summer, and then your sophomore year, ACU brought students back. Is that right?
Yes, and it was kind of a little bit like they were one of the only smaller schools that were doing this kind of thing, but essentially every student had probably about half classes online and half classes in person, but not in traditional classrooms. So think gyms or dance studios, sometimes even outside, and everyone's like 6 or more feet apart with masks. And so it's just a little difficult to kind of have an interactive class or meet people through that. But
Yeah, for sure. And so when you were doing your Zoom classes, were you in your res hall? You were doing that like in
Mhm.
your dorm room?
Yeah.
Oh, so did you have a roommate then?
Yes, and at that time, she had switched her major over to the same one as I had, and so we were in, like, a ton of classes at the same time together, just doing, like, Zooms on this side of the room and this side, but, yeah,
That
we made
is
it
so
through.
It just seems so unbelievable that that was reality for a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, just let's not go back there. Let's we're not doing that anymore. So your roommate though, did you have the same roommate your freshman and sophomore year?
No, so my freshman year roommate was a high school friend, and she ended up not returning to campus the following year. And the girl that I ended up rooming with the second year, I met at orientation, and she was like one of the few connections that I've had all through college, lifelong friend. And so if it hadn't been for her friendship, I mean, not that I would be able to go back and see what my life would have been like, but I don't know if I would have stayed at ACU.
Yeah. It's such a great point. It's like the article I was just talking about with orientation, where it's like the first time that you're able to be with other people. And I think sometimes we put so much focus on like, you have to learn all the things, right? You have to learn about academics and the registrar and how to pay your bill and all this stuff, that it is so important that you weave in places for people to create those friendships.
Mhm.
And we always talk about the art of community, which is how you use rituals and language and space and rules to teach people what it's like to be on campus. And so it's really fun to think about like that's a place for you where you're like, in this second, I met this person who I'm going to know for the rest of my life. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you had your sophomore year online. You were telling me though that in the middle of that, it was kind of like, just get this done.
Yes. So I started school with the intent of graduating in 3 years. And it was just hard for me. I was like, the main reason that I am going to this university is to get my degree. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I took on summer classes and winter classes and tried to just cram it all in. And that kind of took the joy of being in college, like, out of the equation.
Yeah.
But at that time, like, just getting the degree was like my main priority.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I can understand why, right? Because there wasn't a lot of stuff going on. I
yeah.
think ACU was doing pledging, but they were doing it like in masks, and a lot of the clubs weren't able to meet. And there was just like a lot of disconnect in that. Did you have any opportunities in those early years, thinking specifically around sophomore and junior, to connect with people even outside of ACU?
If you were connecting with anyone outside of the university, it was very kind of on the DL type of thing. But yeah, I was able to get involved with World's Backyard, which we basically got the okay to every month go visit children in low income apartments and just provide an hour of childcare for their parents and just play with them. And yes, we still wore masks and did all the things, but it was at least a little bit kind of removing yourself from the cage of your dorm room, I guess, is
Yeah,
kind of what it felt like sometimes.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
What's it called, Lindsay? It's called World's Backyard.
mhm.
World's Backyard. Yeah. I was just thinking about for those students, for those kids, how nice it must have been. I mean, probably for the parents too, right? To be able to be like, just go and have a little bit of normalcy
Mhm.
in what you're doing, and be able to experience really that community piece.
Mhm.
Okay. So sophomore year, junior year was a turning point for you.
Yeah, so the end of sophomore year is when you can kind of apply to be involved in planning committees or various things on campus. And so I had applied for a few of them, one of them being a press secretary position on the student government cabinet. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to submit this because I really want like an on-campus job and we'll just see how it goes. And so I ended up getting the position, and that summer, like, I started developing community with those people, and they welcomed me into their circles of friends, and I just got more connected on campus too. At the time, the president really like took me under her wing and kind of mentored me and really showed me a good example of what it means to like go out of your way and meet people and talk to the students that maybe are always looking down and not ever trying to interact with others. And so through that, I was slowly starting to understand, oh wow, college can be fun.
Yeah, then you're like, pump the brakes. Never mind, 3
Yeah.
years. We'll take a little bit more time, actually. That'll be fine. So I want to pause before we get into the part of your journey where you were the president of SGA and just ask, like, if you had advice or strategies for students. It's so nice for us to have you on Cap and Gown, because so often our guests and our thinking is about what we tell students, how we help them, how we support them, but also your insight into what kinds of language and strategies resonate with students and are helpful to them to be successful. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the immediate post-COVID, the people in administration were like, okay, let's get as many events going as possible. We want students to come back together, get involved. But at that point, because students weren't going to anything, it's like, why would they be motivated now to go to an event? And so it took a while for any student events to gain momentum, people to get interested again. As far as specific language that I think is really helpful for students to hear is specifically probably just directed communication with them. That way they feel seen and heard for themselves, because every student's experience is unique and they don't want to be roped into kind of just a group of students because maybe they're not from the same area or they don't speak the same language. Like, so many things can distinguish different students. And so I think really hitting home on specific communication, personalized communication, is probably the best way to reach students now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that you can do so much harm when you make assumptions and you tell students a thing without listening to them or getting to know them, right? Because then it's like no communication actually would have been better. Because then I just feel like maybe no one's paying attention to me. But this is like, you are paying attention to me, but you don't care enough to know my story, to sit with me, to connect with me, and to talk. It's why we are so bossy in our student success funnel about connecting with students before we try to solve their problems, because we can be wrong about what we think we should be trying to solve, right?
Absolutely.
It's just such a hard strategy for people to execute sometimes, right? Because there's no way to replace the being in the same space as a person and just being quiet and listening to what they have to say and asking good questions. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I appreciate the kind of doubling down on, we need to pay attention to our student stories. Okay, so you then moved into a leadership position, but that was not like a clear line for you. You weren't like, okay, now for sure I'm going to be the president. You kind of wrestled with that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I went from not really being involved in anything on campus besides like my major focused org. And I just look around and like there's so many people in student government that have lots more years of experience doing this, know what they want. And there were a lot of times when I was like, okay, like I love being a part of this organization, but I think the next obvious step for me is probably like marketing director or something like that. But as time went on, I started getting like little people in my ear like, hey, like you should run for president. And then a month would go by and then I would hear someone else say, you should run for president. And so the longer I started to kind of consider what kind of experience could I gain from that position, or what could I learn being in that position versus doing something that I kind of already had a lot of experience in, I was like, okay, so I made my pros and cons lists of all the positions I was considering, and it just made more sense for me to go after that position specifically because I wanted to learn how could I be an effective project manager. I want to invest in a team and learn how to build a team and encourage a team, motivate them. And so a little bit of time went by, like right before campaigning was going to begin, and the person that originally was very vocal about I'm running for president, I basically just sat down and had coffee with them, and I was like, this is my reasoning. I don't want to like have a burned bridge here. But it ended up being great, and she was like, I'm so glad you said that. I want to be your vice president. And I was like, oh, okay, that's amazing.
Didn't see that one coming.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think both of the positions were the best for each one of our strengths because we balanced each other out in so many great ways. And just with all the things that the other person wanted to focus on in addition to student government, I think that being vice president really allowed her to kind of explore those other opportunities. And so, yeah, that's
I
kind
love
of
that.
journey.
Yeah, no, I love that because there's two elements to that story that I think are so important for us to just camp on for a minute. One is the giving you a vision for yourself that you didn't have to start. And we talk about this all the time with in our belonging cues. How do you send belonging cues to somebody? You talk about the future of your relationship. So you think about with students, you say when you graduate, when you get your PhD, when you become president of the SGA, and sometimes that's a thing that they would never have imagined for themselves. And yet somehow speaking that to them then just opens up all of these opportunities for them to consider.
Yeah.
And so it's such a fun part where you're like, I don't know. And then people start pulling that vision out. Have you told the people who said you should run for president, hey, thanks for telling me that?
Oh, yeah. And the biggest advocate of that was the previous president before me. And so, like I said, like she really got me through in so
Yeah.
many ways, but especially in professional development throughout college, just really pushed me to get outside my comfort zone and try new things. And yeah, definitely very thankful for them. I had to do kind of a presentation on somebody that meant a lot to me in one of my business leadership classes, and I did it on her and sent that to her as kind of like a
Thank
so
you.
yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. It's one of my favorite things about the period of college is that you are so hungry to learn who you are and what you can do and what you're interested in and what the path is going to look like. And so we talk so often about finding our at-risk students and making sure we're identifying them. But the joy of working on a college campus is about everybody trying to figure out and try and learn and being really ready to be inspired about what the future could be and what the vision is, right? So I really love that. The other thing that I really like is I'm always saying on Capping Gown that we have just a stable of people at Ferris Resources that have all worked in higher education in various ways. Also, we're various kinds of students. And so whatever the issue, we're like, do you need expertise on the registrar's office? We have that. Do you need expertise on transfer students or, whatever that is? I'm so happy for the expertise that you bring about the student leadership positions. And we'll talk about this in just a minute, but the standing in the middle so often with administrators around really difficult issues, right? And that not just understanding the leadership piece of that you have to do that in order to lead a group of people, but also having had the experience where you're like, I have constituents, and then I have me, and then I have the president, and he has constituents, probably 8 different groups of constituents, right? And just so I want to ask you a question about that. It seems like that can be a very lonely place for a person to be, right? We talk a lot of times about leadership being really lonely because you're the only one who's going through the experience that you're going through. Did you find that to be true for you in those positions?
Yeah, and I will say not all the time is it lonely. A lot of the time it's really great to see the fruits of your labor come. But in the not so popular times, it can be like, wow, no one really understands. everything that's going on. And I don't want to waste my breath trying to explain that to them because they're not going to have any more empathy for me. But specifically, when students and administration are disagreeing on maybe a policy or a stance, if the university, specifically ACU being faith-based, they have a little bit more freedom to have mission statements that may be different than state schools and different things like that. And so I was kind of in the middle of a little bit of tension between students, administration, the board of trustees, university council, lots of people that play into the university, and the hardest part, I think, was when you have a complete outside perspective. So in this case, it was the Abilene News. And they come in and they want to get kind of my 2 cents about everything that's going on. And with that are leading questions and things that can maybe push the envelope a little too far. Yeah. And so when you are being kind of pried in that way, it can feel, well, I can't disappoint these people because that's who I'm representing as the student body. And then I can't disappoint administration because then they're not going to want to work with me in the future on other initiatives. So it's really hard sometimes balancing everyone's interests and trying to remain neutral in all things. But it was great to have kind of just a circle of mentors that I could talk to about these things who kind of grasped a little bit of my position. And so that's definitely key.
Yeah, for sure. You do have to have people who can just speak the truth to you and also be like, it's okay, you're doing a great job, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to give an example from something that you worked really hard for when you were a college student. So you wanted to increase the minimum wage on campus. This actually just got passed in the last couple of weeks. So congratulations on that. That's really fun.
Thanks.
And I was thinking about it in terms of why that was so important to you. Why was that a thing that you were really invested in?
Well, so most of the things that I'm invested in, if they don't have to do with money, are because the Senate is invested in them. And so there was a senator who in her sophomore year, it was right before she studied abroad, she basically came up with some research she had put together and passed a resolution within the Senate that basically said, hey, based on all of this data, it would make sense if we increase the student minimum wage to $9 an hour. And so from there, the president before me kind of started the conversation, moved the envelope a little further. But once I got it, that senator was back in Senate, back from study abroad. And so we were able to really meet and kind of come up with a little bit more tangible ways to present this to administration. And honestly, without the work of my treasurer, none of that would have been possible because he really put together all of the data analysis and looking at past data on what have students been paid, why aren't students working on campus as much as they used to, and really just trying to put forth a convincing argument that you can make almost $10 more off campus and you just walk across the street. Yeah. But I really trying to work with everyone.
Yeah, I think it is such a great example. If you think about, I mean, you guys said as you were pitching this to administration, this is about student engagement. Mm-hmm. This is about keeping our students on campus. This is about giving them a touch point relationship where their supervisor is somebody who is checking in on them every day, knows what's happening with them, right? It is really present in their lives. Thinking about the flexibility that comes when your supervisor on campus understands the rhythm of the academic year. And so is like, hey, I know we're in the middle of midterms that you wouldn't have off of campus. It's such a great example of a very small thing that benefits students, like very practically when we talk about wage, but then also tying that to the more we can keep students on campus, the better connected they are, the more relationships they'll have, and the more likely, if something's going on, we'll be able to kind of go in and say, hey, what's happening with that?
Absolutely.
It's really funny in our referral. One of the things that we do is we have like, what is your relationship to the student? And we have a lot of schools that add supervisor, like employment supervisor. which is so helpful because those are people who are going to know, right? Because I see you
Yeah.
all the time and I'm just managing your work and we're having great conversations on the side. Such a important relationship there.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So you in the Gallup strengths, you are an includer. So this is the idea that you like find people who are kind of left out and you invite them in and make sure that they feel included. One of the key ideas in your platform was that you were around representation. Like, I want to represent the entire campus and make sure that everybody feels seen and we're doing the right things for all of our students. So we've alluded to this a little bit, but how did you reach quiet students who weren't volunteering and weren't coming to your events and were, as you said, kind of head down, not eager to engage in the process with you?
Absolutely. So the only reason that I think I have the includer strength is because I've moved around so much in my younger years. And so being adjusted to a new school and making new friends all before college, I think kind of set me up for, okay, like I didn't like being that student. How can I reach the students that were me?
Mm.
And so in the act of the representation under our campaign, basically, we wanted to go out of our way to find the students that aren't just that same 300 students that come to everything and are involved in everything, know everyone on campus, but the ones that maybe are more focused on their major, or maybe they have to work off campus because they simply can't afford groceries every week. And so the biggest way that we were able to really interact with students is through our campaign weeks and tabling. So we hosted about 10 campaign weeks focused around different causes such as recycling or mental health and different things like that. And so the president before me, again, she set a great example in when you're tabling, you do not sit behind the table and wait for people to come to you. You are in front of the table going towards the students, handing them like a free, it could be a popsicle or something along the lines of whatever campaign week we were celebrating, and just start up a conversation with them. And so we would do this pretty much after the big chapel of the week, which is Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and everyone kind of comes to the cafeteria to eat lunch right after this. And so you have a plethora of students and like students that maybe don't go to anything except that they have to go to the required chapel. And so that's a great opportunity to try and just get to know more people on campus, because at the end of the day, going towards being transparent with what student government is trying to do for other students is listening to all of the students. And I think there's still so much more improvement and more that student government could be doing on campus to meet the quiet students, but that's just one example.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, the standing in the cafeteria after chapel is collision hours, which we're always talking about. I say it's like why you park in this parking lot and then you walk across campus to get to your office, because you can run into people that you maybe normally wouldn't be able to see.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I love the idea of kind of going where the quiet students are, because they are someplace,
Mm-hmm.
right? The difficulty is kind of twofold. It's like figuring out where they are and then drawing them into a conversation. And so when you can find where they are and then go to them and have that including spirit, which is like, no, I'm not trying to sell you something, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get you to do something. Is there something that we can talk about, right? That's just kind of holding space for them to be able to engage with you.
Absolutely.
I also love the idea of so many of our student affairs and academic professionals have a bowl of candy on their desk. It's a very low, what is that? It's like, it doesn't cost the student a lot to just take the candy, but you have an opportunity then to be like, how's it going? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We worked with the school where the woman in the tutoring center had coffee for students. And so she has a great story about a student who, like, in the first weeks would just walk past and like side eye the coffee, like, I really want that, but I can't commit to it. And then after a while he would come in and he would stand close to the coffee. And she's like, it seriously took almost the entire semester
Wow.
before he felt comfortable coming in and getting some coffee. And then she was like, and then I just had to be very, very still
Mhm.
to not startle him, right? So that he would be like, never mind, I'm never doing this again. The
Right.
patience in that process to say, like, I'm going to give you a reason to want to come and be close to me, and also just
Mhm.
space in case something's going on that you want to talk
Oh,
about.
yeah. That is a great idea.
It's a great move from, I think, reactive to proactive, right? Where instead of just, like you said, waiting for something to happen or only managing the students who come to see you, that you're like, no, I need to be proactive and create these opportunities to run into students.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, my last question for you is, most of our listeners are working either on the student life side of the house or academics and higher education. We are constantly thinking about what we need to do to be most helpful to our students. Do you have advice for us as we are crafting those events, our conversations, thinking about ways to provide great resources to our students? What is your parting advice for us?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but in my position, it kind of seemed like my, I guess, upper level management, if we're thinking of it in a business term, we're always wanting to like, let's do this event, or let's bring this big thing to campus because it's big, so students will come. And at the end of the day, you don't need to have a massive budget for student events to create an environment where students feel welcome on your campus. And I think that it really starts with the relationship aspect of things, going out of your way to learn a little bit more about that student that you always see sitting by themselves in the corner of the library. Or maybe you buy the student a Starbucks drink in the local little Starbucks on your campus. Just things like that maybe that student never would have guessed or even thought, oh, wow, like they see me
Yeah.
and they're going to go out of their way to kind of show kindness.
Yeah.
But
It's so good, Lindsay, because I was thinking about, on a college campus, thinking specifically around student life, those people who are drawn to that profession tend to be extroverts. They tend to love to be around other people. They want the events and the parties and all of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And one thing that I'm hearing on so many campuses is that students are coming in, and it's exactly what you said. They're not used to doing those events. They haven't done them. They don't resonate with them as well.
Mhm.
And so there's a side of that coin, which is like, we want to teach our students how to be engaged, how to show up for things with their community and that sort of thing, which for sure is true.
Mhm.
But there's this other side, which is like, there are students who, even in the best of times, events are not the way to go, right? They're just never going to want to go to that thing.
Mhm.
And so thinking about how do we craft these smaller experiences for students who need kind of one-on-one. When I worked at ACU, actually, I did some research about the kind of campus it was, the personality of the campus, and it was an ENFP campus, which won't surprise you. It's like super extroverted and like all the things. And I remember walking into my orientation. It was in our gigantic Moody Coliseum. It was all of the juniors and seniors standing in the Coliseum with gigantic signs yelling. Like they were doing it like, this is exciting. And I was like, oh my God,
This is oriented.
out of here. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But thinking about like, that's going to resonate with the kind of student, and you for sure should do it. But you also have to find these other ways to engage with students who that just feels super overwhelming and they can't manage it. So I love those quiet conversations with our quiet students to say, you are important here, even if you don't want to have this gigantic event going on. No Ferris wheels. You don't have to bring a Ferris wheel.
Yeah, and I would even say that sometimes letting students kind of lead their own initiatives is a lot better than trying to force them to lead things that you tell them to do or you think that this will be great. Because students will form their little groups and their interests. And honestly, sometimes those are the better events that more people are coming to because it's so student-centric.
Yeah.
So don't focus too much on being everything all at once.
I've been thinking a lot about esports this week. We were just on a
Yes.
campus where they have esports, and I promise you that's how that got started, right? I was thinking about like back in the day when AC was doing these crazy orientations, and we would have the computer science majors who were like, we're not doing any of that. Like we want to sit in a room and play video games together. I'm sure that's how esports got started and all over the United States, right? As students being like, hey, we love this idea of competing in this way. So I think that's great.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to add before we're done for the day?
Well, I would just say that, every student's story is unique to them and it's different. And if you assume that a student is going through something, or maybe you kind of have a little gut reaction like, oh, maybe I should go talk to that student, follow that reaction, because a lot of the time, like, everyone is just looking for someone that they can kind of unload to and connect with. And so it's a beautiful time to kind of learn a lot about yourself and form your wings as you fly into the world post-college. But
yeah, and if you're wrong, if the student's fine, like the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be like, hey, is everything okay? And they're going to say yes, and then they'll be like, thanks for checking on me, right? So I think that's a good strategy. Like, just go check on everybody if you think about it. I think that's
exactly.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Next week, we have Dr. Sherry Woosley, who is going to be talking about employment and all sorts of interesting things. She has a great brain. Also, listeners, thank you so much for joining us. I would love for you to subscribe if you're listening to us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on LinkedIn, you can comment. I know that you can find us any place you find your podcast. So thank you for listening to us as you drive or you do the dishes or whatever else. We really take it as a privilege that we get to spend time with you and talk about these issues in higher education. So, Lindsay, thanks so much for joining me. It was good to spend time with you. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody have a good day. Bye.